Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. I'm the Magi because it's murders. That's right, we're here today to talk about the brand new set Murders at Karlov Manor. We are going to be talking about the new intricacies of the sealed environment for those that are going to be attending pre-releases here in the near future. And then we're going to shift the discussion to a more focused context of budget players and the arena client for the set. But before we get into all that, take just a moment to like, comment, and subscribe, because that kind of thing really keeps this boat moving. Now, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, right. Alright, so let's start by talking about the biggest thing, and that is certainly the transition to play boosters. That's right, folks, draft boosters are gone the way of the dodo. In case you've been under a rock for a little while, play boosters are the latest and greatest thing. The first thing that we need to consider here is there is one less playable card per pack. That means in your sealed pool, you're giving up 6 cards. And while I don't think this is really going to be noticeable in limited environments where you have more card selection control, in something like sealed where you get what you get, I think this has the potential to be far more noticeable. At the same time, the fine folks at Wizards of the Coast have seen their way to convert 3 of the existing common slots to slots that can be upgraded in rarity. We don't have exact statistics on this just yet from a practical standpoint, but it looks to be pretty readily upgradable. That means in all, in particular for sealed pool, you are going to have less commons available in your pool. The design team for the limited environment sets has kind of flipped the script on us as well. Typically, these sets were designed with about 100 commons and 80 uncommons. And for this set and moving forward, they've flipped those numbers. Now sets are going to be designed with only 80 commons and a full 100 uncommons. Now, these shifts are likely to have 2 noticeable impacts, particularly in sealed. First, it may very easily seem like everyone's playing the same 10 or so commons in any given color. Secondly, because higher rarity cards tend to be mechanical payoffs, with the lower commonality cards being the enablers, you may find that this is a little out of balance, in particular with this first set that they designed this way, where you have a lot of great payoffs in your pool, but not enough enablers to really make them worthwhile. So be sure to check on these mechanical balances as you build your deck. All right, so enough about the play booster impact. In regards to this set in broader terms, this is the most gold set we have seen in a really long time. In fact, 20% of this set, give or take, based on my own rough counts, is a forced gold environment, meaning you've got to have 2 or more colors to be able to play these cards. That's double what we typically see in a multicolor environment, even for Ravnica. Most of those multicolor sets are generally covering 5 distinct color combinations. If you remember the last Ravnica cycle, we had 2 back-to-back sets. Each one of them covered 5 of the guilds, not 10 all at once. This set is covering all 10 of the 2 color combinations all at once. That means that you are much more likely to have cards, particularly in your sealed pool, that are just really not playable with regards to the rest of your pool, even if you are able to splash for a 3rd color. And when you take all of this in stride and look at it all at once, really a true 2-color deck is pretty unlikely in this environment. Not to say that it won't happen, but I'd say it is not going to be the majority of decks. In fact, I think the majority of people are going to want, or in many cases need, to splash for a 3rd color. And well, you might even have to play some less desirable cards even to make a 3-color splash have enough playables in it. Luckily though, fixing at lower rarities is pretty generous, and we'll talk about that in more detail later in the video. As we begin discussing the mechanical specifics of this set, do not worry because we are on the case. That's right, it's a new form of enchantment, and I think the most important thing to know about this is it is not a saga. Although it does read sort of top to bottom across different stages, these things do not happen automatically other than the first condition. That is always going to be a on resolution, an ETB effect, a static ability, something like that. From there, we have the solve condition, and that is something that you need to achieve in order to solve the case. It is also important that if you are solving a case in the turn, it does not become solved automatically. If an unsolved case becomes solved, it does so at the beginning of your end step. And then, of course, we have the solved state, which can be another resolving effect. It can be a pseudo ETB where it brings something else onto the battlefield. All of these things are possible conditions on there. To be honest, the layout and the thought process behind this is a little clunky for my taste. And I'm hoping maybe they refine this into something else at some point. I don't know. But all in all, it is very evocative. And I have to give Wizards points on that for this set. There's many things within this set that are extremely evocative. And of course, when we're on the case, we are going to want to investigate. That's right. If you didn't see this coming, it's time to get a clue. Sorry, that's all the bad puns I'm going to do here, I promise. The investigate mechanic is back, creating clue tokens. It works just like it always has, no real difference there. This time around though, we do have clues in other forms like equipment, creatures, and even lands. So there is definitely a lot of clues to get cracking. And you really might want to keep a close eye on this next generation of clues, because the last time they took one of these throwaway tokens and gave it a little bit more substance, it ended up being kind of low-key one of the best budget cards in the whole set. And it turns out clues are such an integral part of this set and its limited environment that it is, well, really going to be found in any of the archetypes, but is more or less the basis for 3 of them. And, well, all of them happen to be base blue, and, well, I had to call them Blue's Clues. Dimir gets a very controlling clues matter sort of thing. Azorius is the AKA Detectives deck that also cares about drawing your second card each turn. And oh look, clues help you do that. And Izzet, of course, is all about clues entering the battlefield or being sacrificed. And, well, clues are artifacts, and that's going to go a long way. And what do you do when you find a clue? You collect the evidence, of course. Collect evidence is a cost that you may be asked to pay in a variety of contexts, like part of an activation cost or an additional cost to cast a spell. There's even one card that's how you activate its ward ability or pay for its ward cost. Each time you've asked to collect evidence, exile any number of cards in your graveyard with total mana value of the indicated number or greater. It doesn't have to be exacties. So here it's looking at the total mana value of the cards that you remove, not the quantity of cards to be removed. Collect evidence is the basis for 2 or more of our limited archetypes. The first, of course, being Golgari, and the second being Simic, both of which care about putting things into or taking things out of your graveyard, a la Collect Evidence enables that greatly. The Simic deck for this set quite literally just wants you to collect evidence as much as possible, whereas the Golgari Gravebreaker deck is really more of a late game strategy and almost a bit of a reanimator, offering you extra value from cards that are already in your graveyard. And as we follow the breadcrumbs, evidence often leads to suspects, and in this case, mechanically, that is a new attribute that can be added to or taken away any creature on the battlefield. When a creature is a suspect, it has menace and also cannot be blocked. As I said, this can be added or taken away through a variety of different means, and you're going to see a lot of this at lower rarities. While Suspect can show up in any number of archetypes, I believe it is going to come to bear most successfully in the two red-based aggro archetypes for this set. The first being the Boros Go Wide, which will make very good use of restricting the opponent's ability to block. And then the Rakdos will make good use of the menace ability on its own creatures, allowing them to attack more aggressively. The bottom line here is Suspect is all about aggression and being able to attack blatantly. And hey, I hope you listened back when I recommended playing Khans of Tarkir in December, because the final mechanical attribute of this set is none other than our friend Morph. Okay, so actually it's more like Morph wearing a funny glasses and a trench coat, a la the new disguise mechanic, which functionally is very similar to Morph. You pay 3 mana of any color, you put a card face down onto the battlefield as a 2/2 creature, but this time around it has Ward 2, so it doesn't just immediately get shocked off the battlefield. Of course, we do get some lovely tokens, both in IRL and Arena, to show these mysterious creatures. And in a variation on this mechanic, you are able to cloak any old card face down as a 2/2 creature with Ward 2, just like you would with the disguise mechanic. If it is a creature, you can then pay its casting cost at any time to flip over that disguised creature, or you can just play a land out of your hand that's kind of a dead card and make it a useful 2/2 creature potentially. And you guessed it, Disguise is the basis for our last 3 archetypes within this limited environment. Selesnya is a go-wide strategy that cares about flipping those disguised creatures over. Red-Green Gruul is really all about using the disguise mechanic and some acceleration tricks to get some big fat creatures onto the board really before expectations. And then the Orzhov white-black color pairing really cares more about getting 2/2 creatures into play. And of course, the disguise mechanic fits that very nicely, and then has the late game option of actually flipping those creatures into more relevant aspects after you've already received benefit for the 2/2 coming into play. The Gruul color pair in particular, I think, has a lot of potential to combine with some of the Simic cards from Khans of Tarkir that we played around with mostly in December, to provide a red, green, blue teamer deck built around Morph that could be a real budget option for entering into Eternal formats. How competitive that will ultimately be remains to be seen. Morph was very nearly the defining aspect of Khans of Tarkir Limited, which of course is thought of as one of the best limited environments Magic the Gathering has ever created. And I think that is going to be true of the disguise mechanic in this limited environment as well. The rule of 5 remains true for the disguise mechanic, meaning that before 5 mana, your morph creatures will always trade. It's not until you hit that 5 mana that then you can then morph a creature into something that would eat a non-morph creature. For this reason, and morph being so prevalent, hitting your 3-drop on curve and being able to morph a creature, as well as hitting your 5 mana on curve, really crucially important. And for that reason, don't be surprised if you see many people running 18 lands in this limited environment to make sure that you can hit that turn 3 morph and threaten to flip on turn 5. An 18th land also makes running a 3rd color, splashing for bombs or removal, a much more viable option, particularly in this environment where the fixing is pretty good at lower rarities. Of course, this is not a fundamentally 3-color set the way Cons is, so this might actually be even easier than it was in Cons. Now that we have introduced all the mechanics and talked about the 10 primary archetypes of the set, I think it's a good time to kind of give my overarching thought when it comes to these archetypes, and that is that these are truly limited archetypes. I do not expect these to have much impact on creating new decks for standard or other environments in Constructed. That having been said, there is still a lot of value to be had for this set. There are a lot of singles here that might not form new decks, but they are going to play roles in existing decks. And let's not forget that Standard now is 3 years. So this set is going to have a little over 2.5 years to become more relevant. Therefore, I think the best thing we as budget players can do is make sure that we're gathering resources here while they are plentiful and in many cases essentially free to us for little to no effort. And then give the set time to grow rather than focusing on trying to adapt these archetypes for constructed environments in the short term. Now, this is the point in the video where I usually make an exception and point out a rare land or a rare colorless card that has some high budget potential for us budget players. But it's just not the case with this set. Instead, I wanted to take just a moment and talk about the rare dual lands. There is a full cycle of 10 here. They all enter the battlefield tapped, and when they ETB, you surveil 1. And again, you've got the full rotation here. You've got all the ally and all the enemy pairs all at once. And these lands are going to be really good. For one reason, they have the basic land types attached to them, even though obviously they are not basic lands themselves, which does make them fetchable in Timeless. And I think there's only, I don't know, 3, perhaps 4 cycles now with those basic land types attached. And well, that makes a big difference for long-term playability on these, particularly in Timeless. So while I would value these highly, I would not necessarily rush in and spend wild cards on them. You've got 3 years in Standard to come up with these cards, and Standard is not at all hurting for dual land alternatives to make your decks work better when you reach those points. This set gives us a couple of interesting uncommon lands that I think we as budget players need to pay particular attention to. First off, the branch of Vitu-Ghazi is a land that taps for colorless. It can also be disguised as a creature for 3 mana and then later flipped for 3 mana. When it's turned face up, add 2 mana of any color until end of turn. You don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. So obviously this can be used for fixing, although it's a little expensive. Living the Dream here is playing it face down as a 2/2 creature, and then declaring it as a blocker, paying the 3 mana, flipping it, getting 2 mana of any color, that could immediately be used as other removal. So you have potentially blocked one creature, destroyed another. And don't forget, you can also use this in response to removal targeting the morph creature. So they've paid, say, 1 for shock. They've paid 2 more to get past the ward on it, and then you flip it into a land and completely blank the removal, and maybe blank a lot of what they were going to do that turn. Very, very interesting things that you can do here. This is a card that is potentially going to see a lot of play, not just in standard, but at the budget level in Eternal formats, potentially for many years, because it's just so versatile. This is basically a land that you could put into a very budget-friendly mono red deck, give you an additional creature, and of course your opponents might very well expect it to be a more powerful morph creature, targeted removal, and again, you have the potential to blank that removal and add value to your game position. Scene of the Crime is another one that gives you some color fixing potential. It does come into the battlefield tapped. It does tap for colorless, or you can tap it and an untapped creature you control to add 1 mana of any color. So it's very budget friendly fixing here, making those 3 color decks a little bit more viable. Obviously, situationally, that could be good or bad because you do have to tap a creature to be able to use it. But for those splash decks and things like that, this could be a low-cost alternative to bear in mind. And of course, once your mana is fixed or you have played your splash cards, it is a clue, so you can also pay 2 and sack it to draw a card. Now, one of the things that is new with the Murders at Karlov Manor is the inclusion of the list on Arena. And along with that, I'm going to be talking about special guests as well. While I am going to cover a few individual cards here, my full breakdown on this is going to be available for my Patreons over on my Patreon page, with particular emphasis on how these will affect your limited environment play, particular emphasis on drafting. The 2 most important cards that I see here are Smuggler's Copter, which is only going to be for the Arena players. IRL paper players, this is not part of the list environment, but it's been added to Arena because it has recently been unbanned for Pioneer and thus Explorer, and is already having pretty huge effects on the meta, and they wanted to get it out here. I would not pass this card up if given the opportunity, and if you are primarily a Explorer, and maybe even timeless and historic player, this might be a card to consider crafting pretty early on. But let's not forget, through the wonder of Arena, you are going to have a full 3 months or so here to be able to draft copies of that card. So don't be too quick on the wildcard button. The other build around uncommon that I think really bears note is the High Alert card from the last Ravnica cycle. It is part of that Sir Mix-a-Lot I like big butts strategy, where your creatures deal power based on their toughness rather than power. I should say they deal damage by toughness rather than power. With cards like Essence of Antiquity, a 1/10 in the base set here, this has got a lot of things that could be going on here. And if you're looking for a cheap, accessible, budget-friendly deck for those Eternal formats, definitely take some pause and think about this one. All said and done, the list and the special guest for this set is about 45% Arena reprints, and that's with them dumping 3 cards and replacing them for Arena play. In particular, the special guests are all being reprinted at the Mythic level. Tireless Tracker and Field of Dreams are both Arena reprints that were previously available at Rare, so if you're considering crafting those cards, make sure to craft the lower rarity rather than the mythic. Drawn in the Lock, on the other hand, now being again offered as a mythic, was previously available as an uncommon and is a very strong card. Actually, all three of these are very strong cards, worthy of spots in your collection. Just be mindful about how you add them to your collection. And of course, the subset is not the only place that we see some reprints. Shock and Murder are both high quality common removal that are reprinted in this set. Shock is a pretty welcome addition to Standard, particularly in this set where the warded morph creatures are going to be pretty prevalent. Murder, on the other hand, I mean, don't get me wrong, I totally see why they did this. It was a little too on the nose to leave out. But Murder was not only already in Standard, but no disrespect to the artist, I think there's better arts than this for Murder. So not a lot of value to be had here. Not to mention that literally everyone on Arena already has 3 copies of each of these cards from their starter decks, pretty much regardless of when you started, because these are in the monocolor decks that are the same year after year. At Common, we also see Magnifying Glass, another really on-the-nose card that unfortunately is not extremely useful, but does have a niche case that we'll talk about in a few minutes. And while we're talking about reprints in the set, Assassin's Trophy is a technical Arena reprint, but given the length of time and its rarity, I don't think this is going to be much of an issue for many budget players out there, particularly those that have joined Arena within the last couple of years. Lightning Helix is also an Arena reprint, but it is now being offered as an uncommon for the first time. Previously, it was from one of the bonus sheets as a rare. Now let's switch gears and talk about cards that are adding value to the set here from a budget player on Arena in particular. Each of the 2 color combinations has a common creature available to them. As a gold card, this looks like it would be very restrictive and really only playable in one deck. But when you realize that these creatures are all disguise, any of them can be played in any deck, face down as a 2/2 with a ward 2 for 3 mana of any color. And of course, each one can flip over. Those disguise costs are hybrid manas, so you can pay 2 of either, in this case, black or green. This one also has 4 colorless in its cost, but that's not always the case. So Rakish Scoundrel, for instance, can be played in any deck running either black or green, making them far more versatile than they originally appear. As I said, it's a full dual color cycle. All of them are really good, I think, with the exception of the Rakish Scoundrel that I'm showing here, mostly because I think the disguise cost to value ratio is just too high here. All other 9 are really super playable. And really, in any 2 color combination, 7 of these are highly accessible. At Uncommon, we also have the Blank and Blank series. In this case, I'm demonstrating Push and Pull. Generally, the one side of it is very low casting cost. In this case, Push for 2 mana, destroy target tapped creature. The second side, so to speak, is a much higher casting cost. In this case, Pull for 4 and 2 hybrid mana. Put up to 2 target creature cards from a single graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. They gain haste until end of turn. Sacrifice them at the beginning of your end step. If you notice, again, because of hybrid, this card can be played in any deck with access to black mana, regardless of having white or red, although obviously versatility is a good thing. Every single one of these, I think, is a pretty playable card, and while that hybrid cost does make it more versatile for limited play, it does the opposite for Brawl, Historic Brawl, Standard Brawl, or Commander, because these are tri-color cards as far as color identity. Lastly, I want to bring this up with the collect evidence mechanic. This is not an issue of picking one side or the other. If you remove this card with collect evidence, it is the combined mana cost. So this single card gives you collect evidence 8. And that is going to be very relevant in both sealed and generally in limited. It may have applications in constructed play. We'll have to wait and see how that plays out. Next up, we've got a cute little trifecta built around Agency Outfitter and its two best friends, Magnifying Glass and Thinking Cap. 6 mana, 4/3, even with flying, is nothing to write home about, particularly in constructed. And even in limited, it's a bit lacking. But as an uncommon that fetches 2 cards, this is something that we budget players need to be on the lookout for. This is a big ask for a sealed environment event to end up with all 3 of these cards. And even in draft, it's probably fairly difficult to pull off. And while it was obviously designed around the Detectives Matter typal deck, I first think it will best actually fit in the Captain Storm decks because a 4/3 flyer isn't bad in that deck. It doesn't have a lot of flying resources, and the fact that it brings 2 artifacts along with it, giving you 2 Captain Storm triggers. The Agency Outfitter can hit. The Magnifying Glass can immediately be tapped for colorless mana to equip the Thinking Cap to the Agency Outfitter. And now it's a 5/5 flyer that could be a 7/7 if you put both the Lannery or the Captain Storm triggers on it. And of course, that deck also likes to sack artifacts, and you've got 2 there that could be doing the job. Magnifying Glass, of course, can also tap for and investigate to give you later artifacts entering the battlefield triggers. There's just a lot going on here. I think it also has a lot of potential in either Standard Brawl or Historic Brawl, where this kind of pseudo card advantage, drawing extra cards, so to speak, can really have a big tempo swing for you. And it may not work out, but I certainly think it's worth considering. This set even has some unusual popper potential in Slime Against Humanity. Anytime we see these cards that a deck can have any number of cards, in this case named Slime Against Humanity, it's worthy of a pause and a second look here, particularly in Popper. These always tend to be interesting in Popper, as well as the various Brawl builds as well, just because it breaks that 1 of 4 of rule that generally exists. In fact, one of these was so good in Popper that it ended up getting banned in Historic Popper. And I think this one has some high potential. There's not a lot of slimes currently in Standard, but of course Historic has some very noteworthy ones. And I think if we do anything with Historic Popper this season, you can look forward to seeing a deck built around this card, at least as an attempt. We'll have to see how it plays out, but I do think it has some potential. This set definitely brought Control some very nice low rarity toys. Sudden Setback, 4 mana. The owner of target spell or non-land permanent puts it on top or bottom of its library. I'm not sure this is the kind of spell that the mono blue Control is looking for, but certainly other X blue Control is definitely going to be making use of this, probably 2 copies or so. No More Lies, of course, is a little more specific for Azorius Control, but it's 2 mana, counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard is tremendously powerful. Now, I say these are budget toys, but it's not necessarily good for budget players. Budget players tend towards the more aggro style of play out of necessity, and we don't often play Control. So this might be more of a negative for the budget community than it is a positive, but in either case, it is something to be aware of. On the opposite side of that coin, the inclusion of Frantic Scapegoat and Red Herring now gives us, I believe, 13 low rarity 1 and 2 drop hasty creatures. And with the recent reprinting of Raid Bombardment in the Wilds of Eldraine bonus sheet, and its inclusion in the Alchemy playable starter decks, I think it's time for us to re-examine Mono Red Rush as a viable, very budget-friendly Alchemy deck. 13 hasty 1 and 2 drop creatures is a ton. We've got Shock and Lightning Strike as very versatile removal. So I'm going to be taking another look at this deck and building it up and testing it extensively, and you might want to give this a look as well. Last up in the conversation about interesting singles is the Flourishing Bloomkin, a 1 and a green plant elemental creature that is a 0/0 that gets +1/+1 for each forest you control. And if you go through the hoops to disguise it and flip it, it will even tutor up 2 forest cards, which you reveal, put 1 onto the battlefield and the other into your hand. Everyone seems to be talking about how much mono green is going to love this card, and maybe once again this is the card to bring mono green back into prevalence. But I think something that's being overlooked is the fact that it cares about forests and fetches forests does not make it a mono green card. In fact, if you combine this with any second color, not only does it very advantageously help you to fix, because there are at least 4 named lands in that forest and second color combination that meet the search criteria. It is a forest, so it will pump your stuff, and it helps you fix your mana base for that second, or in some cases third or fourth color as well. I think people are really underselling this card, and I think it has the potential to do a lot more work than people are giving it credit for, particularly for us budget players. I briefly mentioned earlier that fixing in this set for limited was pretty accessible and easy to go by. So let's take a more in-depth look. As far as colorless, low rarity options at common, Escape Tunnel is just a functional reprint of Terramorphic Expanse, but strictly better because of the Escape Tunnel clause. By tapping it, a target creature with power 2 or less cannot be blocked this turn. And of course, let's not forget that your disguised creatures are based at 2/2, so you could make it unblockable, swing in, and then real time flip it over by paying its disguise cost, and now you might have a 4/4 unblockable. Another land, Public Thoroughfare, is a enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, you have to sacrifice it unless you tap an untapped artifact or land. So there is a bit of a tempo cost here, but once that's been paid and you untap it, it can tap for 1 mana of any color, which makes it one of the more versatile color fixing pieces, not only for this set, but at lower rarity for standard, and of course pauper playability as well. Last up, we've got a Gravestone Strider, a 2 mana 1/3 artifact creature golem. It can let you shift 1 mana each turn to a mana of any color. And you can also exile it from your graveyard, exile target card from a graveyard. So if you're just doing like a splash, this can help you get over that 1 mana per turn hump in order to play your splash cards fairly easily. And a 1/3 body at 2 comes down just before the disguised creatures and basically just bump blocks those very, very effectively. Green commons do a lot for fixing and really punch above their weight category as well. First up, we've got the 3 stages of Topiary Stomper. One, this is a 6 mana 6/5 plant cat with trample. Pretty respectable in its own right, particularly in the late game. It is also a basic land cycler for 2, and please note that is not limited to forests. You can go get functionally any basic land and put it into your hand. That's pretty awesome. And by doing so, you put this very early into the graveyard, where its 6 mana cost can interact very favorably with the collect evidence mechanic. Next up, they went this way is no slouch, allowing you to search your library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. That's pretty decent ramp at 3 mana. It's the kind of thing that sees a lot of play in those ramp style decks, and I don't think this is going to be any exception whatsoever. And of course, we've also got Nervous Gardener with its disguise shenanigans. When you turn it face up, search your library for a land card with a basic land type, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle. Please note the wording there. The card that you search up has to have a basic land type, but it does not have to be a basic land. And as we touched on earlier, Standard currently has 3 distinct cycles of functional dual lands that have basic land types and are valid targets for the Gardener. Of course, Eternal formats have even more than that. And a good fixing for this set isn't just for commons. At Selesnya, 2 colorless, green and a white, buried in the garden, is an enchantment aura, enchant land. When it enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent you don't control, buried in the garden, until buried in the garden leaves the battlefield, whenever enchanted land is tapped for mana, its controller adds an additional mana of any color. So it's basically Oblivion Ring with mana fixing attached. Pretty great. At 2 colorless, Case of the Shattered Pact, when it ETBs, search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, and put it into your hand and shuffle. And of course, this is a case. To solve it, there are 5 colors among permanents you control, and once solved, at the beginning of your combat, on your turn, target creature you control gains flying, double strike, and vigilance until end of turn. That's not a choose one, that is all 3. So if you do happen to solve this, it's pretty ridiculous. Obviously, that is a big ask for limited environments, but this could have some constructed applications, possibly. We did mention Scene of the Crime earlier, and of course it is a somewhat expensive way to fix your mana, but for those splash situations, it's more than serviceable. What I don't think I talked about earlier is the fact that this is an artifact land in Standard, which means it can be Zoetic Glyphed and turn it into a 5/4. It also plays very nicely with the before mentioned Captain Storm decks because it's an artifact entering play. And of course, as I may have mentioned, it is a clue, so you can tap it and sacrifice Scene of the Crime to draw a card, which in some cases might be a great way to discover off of your Zoetic Glyph if you know the creature's going to die anyway, like in a blocking situation or a targeted removal sort of thing. Could be a way to gain a little additional value out of the situation. The equipment clue rope is going to work very nicely with suspected creatures or those that have menace, particularly for the limited environment, though I really don't think this is going to have constructed applications. But again, for limited, making a creature effectively unblockable is going to be pretty interesting. And hey, I know I have talked about Izzet artifacts quite a lot in this budget perspective, but I think it's interesting how Harry Dronesmith and the Detective Satchel can effectively give you 2 Thopter artifacts every single turn, whether that is just using them as creatures, as sacrificial fodder, or as artifacts entering the battlefield triggers. There's a lot of potential value here for 2 uncommons. It might not always come up in your limited pool, but certainly easier to pull off in something like a draft environment, and might even have some constructed applications, although with so many different constructed lines 4 Izzet artifacts, making itself apparent in this set. Choosing the right ones is really going to be the difficult part. But of course, I can't do a budget perspective video without talking about the budget itself for this set. And this time around, I'm sure you won't be surprised, there are some adjustments to be made here to the plan, mostly because of the context of play boosters and how that is going to be affecting limited, primarily draft environments. All in all, I'm suggesting that you increase your daily wins to a total of 3. The first giving you 250 gold, the second and third giving you 100 each. This will give you a large amount of gold per set, approximately 93,000 gold. And that's going to allow you to do 7 jump-in events, a total of 7 drafts, one of which will be using a premium draft token. The other 6 I would suggest doing quick drafts, and that will still leave you enough funds to buy 45 packs and take advantage of that free rare if you're buying all Murders of Karlov Manor packs. Of course, if you are an alchemy player, you might want to readjust that, but we'll talk about that more in a separate video. This will also allow you to take advantage of the gems deal, which tends to come around once per season, and of course that discounted draft token that, again, we tend to see each and every season. For those of you that are wondering, the reason I am suggesting using a premium draft token with each set moving forward is one, that takes a lot of pressure off your jump-in events with regards to participating in the only midweek magic event where you can only use cards from the most recent set. And well, for a lot of us, that can be a real strain because our collection isn't very developed a week in. Secondly, the December release now has migrated to a short window of allowing quick draft as well. So that takes a lot of the pressure off the need for those premium draft tokens in order to collect and participate with the December straight to eternal release, and gives us a little more wiggle room here within our budget. So that's the plan, guys. Make sure to drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you think about it and how you might be budgeting your resources differently. So we've come to the part of the video where I usually close up with a general set of guidelines for sealed play for those going into the pre-release weekend. But we had a lot to say in this video and it's already run a bit long. But Matt would want you to know there's going to be a link down in the doobly-doo, and that will take you to that recently reworked video essay. So be sure to check that out if you are looking to do pre-release or are not entirely confident in how to best play a sealed pool. And before we go, I want to take just a moment to thank my totally awesome patrons for supporting me and allowing me to apply my passion into a community. And of course, before we go, I've got some suggestions for your next step.